Neptunes Fancy by Vincent V. Cava. Upon my soul, she was a lovely thing, pale-skinned, dark hair entwined with the green weeds of the sea. A pity she looked dead. We hauled her up in the tuna nets along with the dolphin heads and fins. Those warm-blooded bastards would trail the fishing fleet and try to steal our catch when they could. Cunning they were, too. But the dead ones are not as smart as they might be, since the razor edges of our nets would slice 'em up if they weren't quick enough. Aye, but she was whole, I saw as we laid her on the deck. Perhaps she'd fallen from some rich man's pleasure vessel in a drinking party out at sea. A whore more likely than not, and naked she was as on her born-in day. But as I leaned over to touch those blue-tipped breasts, I was surprised to feel her move beneath me hands. "Hi, Cap," I yelled. "She's not altogether dead, I think." And the others came closer then to take a look. Those turquoise lips, they parted in a gasp, and she opened up her eyes as red as blood. Of a sudden, she sprang up and dashed across the deck. She crouched amongst some boxes there, and we could see she weren't no human girl at all. How lithe she was. How lean. Her lips drew back to show her teeth, small, white, and sharp like a barracuda's. Moisture beaded, shining on her face and arms. The muscles in her thighs were taut, but scratched deeply by our razored nets. Her breasts were large and pointed. Her fingers and toes were webbed. Rainbow-colored scales speckled her body in places, growing over her skin like the heavenly sores of some angelic leper. She was an apparition of a sailor's blackest, sweetest dreams. Antony, our ship's first mate, was the first to break the trance induced by them round red eyes. Cautiously he gazed about as he forced himself to venture closer to the thing we'd just caught by chance. Antony was the most respected sailor on our boat, a Scot, tall, red, and broad at the shoulders, who had once served in the Queen's Navy. The monster girl was silent as she eyed him from her fortress nests of boxes. Then she made some sounds down in her throat. A seal or dolphin, maybe, like was how it rang inside my ears. The Cap clutched his brother's arms and shook his sister's son and roused the rest of us to wakening. The shock of our first finding her then dripped away like spindrift against a boat's hull. Now we was all curious as hell, and Antony was standing closest to the girl. He took another step and held his hands out so as to let her get the scent of him by way of introduction. She didn't seem to take too much to that, 'cause soon as he was near enough, she bit off a piece of his finger. "Aye, you poor dumb animal!" Antony hollered and waved his damaged finger in the air. It was bleeding horrible. He pulled a kerchief from his pocket and wrapped it tight round the tip of it. "You needn't be afraid, gal," he called out. Antony was a godly man and wouldn't curse the devil himself. "I did not intend to harm ya." The rest of us set up a general roar, but the mate said, "Quiet down, you fools, or else you'll frighten the girl or fish or whatever that thing is. And you wouldn't be wanting to scare a wild animal when it's cornered and hurtin' and female to boot." "Aye," the Cap agreed in a soft voice, parroting Antony, as was his wont. "And I'm betting if she's scared enough to dash for it, she's primed and able to tear the insides out of anything that's got in her way." That's when some sailor said he feared she'd slaughter us all. "Kill her, Cap," another cried, "before she comes at us with that shark-toothed mouth of hers." Then Antony, who had the most reason to wish her harm, raised up his bandaged hand and bade us to relent. "You gents are being hasty here," said he in a peaceful voice. "Mayhap she's not so vicious as we might suppose." And he hid his bloody hand behind his back. "Mayhap she be a gentle thing when she's at home beneath the sea." "Aye," the captain interrupted. A gleam came to his eye. "She's not a monster coming to our midst, lads, but a treasure rare. And beautiful she is, too. A valuable oddity, a priceless curiosity. Boys, we could peddle her in any port for coins enough to last us years to come." He put his arms around the shoulders of those men closest to him and went on. "Fellow sailors, brother merchants, relatives, and friends, if we handle this thing correctly here, we'll all come out as rich as kings." And then the eyes of all of us glistened with that golden light. The Cap had hit upon the thought that each of us had been afraid to see. A treasure trove indeed she was, but what to do? How to proceed? Once caught, how do you keep such a ken of the sea? It was my thought then to give her Tuna. Why else would she pursue the nets? A poor dumb thing I thought her to be. Human in form mayhap she was, but without a soul she were no more than a beast, and beasts were such that man was commanded to rule in those first days of the creation of the world. She would not take the tuna from the deck where I'd tossed it, but she took it soon enough from the bleeding hand of Antony. And when she made her noises, then again a light struck up across the first mate's face. "I hear her, brothers! She speaks the Queen's English!" He sputtered and looked around at each of us, but seeing that we did not hear nor understand the words of the female gave him pause. "But it's plain as milk," he offered towards the cap, "as clear as me mother's words when I sat upon her knee." "Are ye daft, man?" the cap inquired. "Ye say there's words inside them chirps and whistles." Antony turned around, gazing wide-eyed at the creature as she went on with them noises, those blood-red eyes of hers staring back at him just the same. "She says it was me blood that done it, the bit of me flesh that she consumed." He turned to look at the cap. "She says that's why I can hear her in me head." He pulled the rag from his torn finger and we could see the white tip of bone as he dripped his own blood onto a piece of tuna in his other hand. The girl thing sparkled her bloodshot eyes at him, but reached for his injured digit instead of the fish. Gently, slowly, she seemed to move as she raised the bloodied finger to her lips and nipped at his damaged flesh. "Have you gone mad?" cried the cap. "Feeding yourself to this sea beast!" The creature pulled Antony's finger, which by now had been gnawed halfway to the second knuckle, from her mouth and began to yammer once more. We stood in awe while he nodded his head as if he were understanding her yips and yaps. "She be trying to get back to her home, gents," he said with certainty. "And where would that be?" laughed the captain. 1,000 leagues below the ocean's surface." "Nay, it be off the coast of an isle about a week's sail west of here," Antony replied. "She told me so herself. She said she was making her way home when our nets snatched her up. This jewel of the ocean be royalty, captain. Her king rules the sea, and she's his favorite wife." "You sayin' this thing, this fish woman, this web-toed female, be Neptune's Fancy?" asked the cap. But Antony kept right along as if he hadn't heard him. "Our nets have done too much harm to our legs," and he gestured towards the gashes running up and down the merwoman's thighs. "Now she's asking for our help. Her kingdom's built of gold and pearls and precious rubies, and she swore to me on the sanctity of her husband's throne that if we return her home, then we be paid in all the priceless gemstones this barge can haul." "Aye," responded the cap. "Why be as rich as kings when we can be as wealthy as gods?" There was a low rumble from the crew when he said that. Visions of golden underwater towers jutting up from the ocean's rocky floor danced and twirled through our heads like barmaids in a tavern when the grog is flowing heavy and the music be merry and the drunks be clapping along, encouraging 'em. "Bah!" From amidst the crowd arose a voice, hoarse and graveled it was, that broke us from our fantasies. It was old man Job, a half-blind, half-drunk scoundrel that had joined our crew about 3 years prior. Job wasn't much use for sailing, and he wasn't much use for whaling or fishing either, but the captain kept him around because he mopped the deck and cleaned the heads for the bottle of rum, a place to sleep at night and a little bit of food to go in his belly. When he wasn't out at sea, Job slept under the stars and begged for his meals. I'd have felt sorry for the old vagabond had it not been for his nasty demeanor. Cold and hostile, calloused from years of living in the gutters with rats. Couple that with the fact he'd been caught a number of times stealing from the crew, and you can see why I thought so little of the wretched bastard. Truth be told, none of us cared for him, but we tolerated old Job because he took on the duties nobody wanted. Every sailor on the ship then turned his head towards the elderly old man. He was sneering at the girl still crouching amidst the stack of crates, a trail of Antony's blood trickling from her turquoise lips. "A fool's errand ye be suggesting, Antony," said he. He snorted like a pig, then spit a thick wad of phlegm from his mouth. It landed at the first mate's feet, and a bit of it caught the toe of his boot. "And a dangerous one at that. We haven't the rations for such a voyage, and what of Sal Rovers? Have you not considered such things?" "We can restock off the coast of Portugal," Antony replied. "From there our destination is only 3 or 4 days out, depending on the wind." And he once again began to bandage his bloody finger. "As for pirates, my vote says the risk is worth the reward." Job pulled a flask from his coat and took a swig, then fired an eye at the fish girl so sharp it could have pierced her scaly skin. "I don't like that thing, Captain," he said, his voice grinding like a stone pestle being put to work. "It's an abomination of God, and we shouldn't be a-trusting it." And then the captain's voice erupted into fire. "Shut your vile trap, old man," he shouted. "Did you forget your place on my ship? Next time you think to instruct me on anything, I'd suggest you bite your tongue, lest I'll be cutting it out with the blade I keep in me boot. Antony, set a course for the port of Lisbon so we can restock. Friends and brothers, I aim to get rich. In a week's time, we'll never be needing to pluck another fish from the briny blue again." And with that, we raised the mainsail and changed course, setting off west towards our dreams of wealth and fortune. Morale was high amongst the crew 3 days into our voyage. The men sang shanties about mermaids and treasure when we was working and when we weren't. They talked of the extravagant things they aimed to purchase with their share of the loot. You could feel a buzz throughout the ship as every sailor was excited to see what treasure lay at the end of our journey. Every sailor except Job, that is. He hadn't spouted off since the cap had put him in his place, but I could see, even with me bad eye, that the old man's heart had yet to thaw when it came to the web-toed female. Antony, on the other hand, had grown as close as heat to a flame with the girl. She was moved to the first mate's private quarters, away from the curious eyes of the men on our vessel. The door was kept closed for privacy, but remained unlocked as per the captain's orders. Periodically, Cap would send a sailor down to check on him as to make sure the Scot and the fish girl weren't engaged in any perverse, ungodly acts on board his ship. But as I said before, Antony was a man of the book, and I have my doubts that a deviant thought ever crossed his mind. That isn't to say our first mate wasn't acting strange round the girl, though. He took to feeding pieces of himself to her nightly, and I had the dubious honor of assisting him on those first couple of evenings when the cap had ordered me to pay them a visit. First, Antony would instruct me to fetch a tuna from the deck, a big one. As it turned out, the girl had an appetite on par with that of a horse. When I returned, he would unsheath the knife he wore on his belt and roll the sleeve of his shirt up around his elbow. Much to the displeasure of me eyes, Antony would then dig the blade's edge into his forearm and carve free small sliver of flesh. Inside the mouth of the tuna is where he'd place the lump of skin and muscle so that she could eat it with her supper. The girl devoured her fish raw like I hear the heathens of the Orient do, head, bone, and tail, all with the bit of Antony's flesh inside it. I'd watch her eat it while I helped him dress his wound. The smacking of her lips as she savored the uncooked tuna in her mouth was difficult on my ears. Every bite, accompanied by an abundance of nauseating noises, slurping and sucking sounds, would fill the first mate's cabin while she licked at the poor dead fish's eyes and grinded its bones between her pointed teeth. A gruesome sight it was indeed, but I came to reason that Antony was letting the she-thing consume him for a purpose. It was explained to me through my discussions with the first mate, however limited they might have been, that over the course of each day Antony lost the ability to understand the fish girl's tongue. Only when his flesh was inside the merwoman's stomach could he make heads or tails of her high-pitched whistles. And how clever of him it was, I did believe, to continue their discussion and gain her trust, so as to ensure she did not go back against her word. I was glad that it was he and not I that had bonded with the creature. She appeared almost human at passing glance, but moved and acted like a wild animal. Gaze into her eyes and all you'd see was a feral beast staring back at you. This I found to be unsettling. I wondered too how the Scot felt safe sharing his cabin with her, but alas, men have done far stranger things for the promise of wealth. On the final night before Lisbon, the she-thing even managed to bite me hand as I was offering her a fish. An accident is what I believed it to be. Mayhap I should have paid more mind when delivering a hungry animal its meal. Nevertheless, her teeth had broken the skin and drawn blood enough that I needed to bandage myself. Happy to oblige I was when Antony dismissed me from his quarters for the evening following the encounter. By the time we docked in the port of Lisbon the next day, our rations had run bone dry. The cap sent only his most trusted men out for supplies and ordered the rest of us to stay on board. He feared that turning us loose in the city might have led to some unwanted queries from the locals about the special cargo we was hauling. When sailors reach dock, sailors tend to drink. Now a boozed-up sailor can still be of use to a captain in a lot of ways, but keeping a secret ain't one of them. All this was for the best, as I was not wanted to take any extra responsibilities that day anyhow. From the moment I had woken that morning, my joints had ached terribly and my head had felt misty and muddled. Antony had locked the girl away inside his room, while he was out leading the cap's chosen few through Lisbon. I, along with most of the crew, stayed on the ship and waited for he and the rest of the men to return with provisions so we could be on our way. Without the freedom to leave the boat, there wasn't much to do except drink myself to sleep and hope my joint pain passed, so that's exactly what I aimed to accomplish that afternoon. I was taking a cat nap in me hammock when I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my forearm. The sensation shocked me something fierce, but a sudden feeling of dread kept me from opening my eyes right away. For you see, I was sure as birth and death it was the fish girl that had snagged me. With Antony out acquiring rations, my groggy mind reasoned she had come to me looking for a meal. After all, it had been I alone who was assisting the first mate during her grisly suppers. Those icy fingers were gripping me tight, and the damp hand had me certain I was about to wake and find her standing over me, grinning down with that mouthful of daggers, and staring through me with those blood-red eyes. But when I finally mustered the courage to look, I saw that it was Job who had stirred me back to the waking world. I sat up in me hammock and readied myself to crack him with the back of me hand for rousing me from my nap. There weren't a lot of men on board that I would strike, but Job was the lowest in the pecking order, and a known thief at that, so I had no qualms with belting the old bastard, especially after catching him sneaking around the berth when he should have been topside scrubbing the ship's heads. To top it off, the pain in me joints was throbbing worse than ever, and I had attributed that to my sudden wakening. But the look of distress on his face gave me pause long enough to speak, and I lost the urge to strike him once he opened his yellow-toothed mouth. "You needn't be upset about me rising you from your slumber," he said. Even the sound of his whispering grinded awful-like in me ears. "I came to talk about the monster we pulled from the drink a few days back. That thing has got our first mate wrapped around her scaly finger and our captain fantasizing about a treasure that may or may not be real. There be not something altogether right about the journey we're embarking on. To me, it stinks to hell and back. Last eve, I hid behind the Scots door and listened to the things he was saying to the creature. Well, he weren't talking of no jewels or kingdoms, I can tell you that. I can't say for sure, 'cause I couldn't understand the monster's tongue, but his words, they sounded treacherous. She put a spell on him, I be thinking, one that somehow gives her the key to his mind. Mayhap her power lies in the fact that she be eating little bits of him nightly. I watched you help him feed her, and that's the only reason me head can fathom why he'd collude with such a beast in the first place. Witchcraft it is. Now I be thinking he and she might be leading us to our deaths. We must be wary, you and I. For to blindly trust a soulless creature such as she is as mad as taking the devil for his word." I yanked my arm free from his grasp and told him he was lucky I wasn't the type to rat him out to Anthony about his eavesdropping. He tried to plead with me, but my bleary mind had been made up, and I was in no mood to listen to the ramblings of a dirty old thief. "To hell with you," he shouted at me. "You're just like the rest of them, just like the captain. So blinded by your greed you can't see the danger right before your eyes. Well, if you don't believe me, then I'll prove it to you." Job then stormed from the berth with the fury of a tempest, while I strained to forget the old man's warnings long enough to fall back asleep. We was putting a lot of trust in Anthony to lead us to the promised land. True it was, the first mate had never given any of us reason to doubt him, but I wondered then as I lay in my hammock if this was cause enough to follow his lead without question. We raised anchor and set off from the dock the next morning. Once the shore had disappeared behind the horizon, the cap called every able-bodied sailor to the deck for a meeting. When I arrived, I was surprised to see the fish girl standing beside Anthony in the cap. It was the first time she had been topside since we caught her. She was dressed in a garment so as to cover up her lady parts, more animal than woman she might have been, but the cap had insisted that keeping her covered was the Christian thing to do, so he made sure to have her garbed in front of the crew. It was the first mate's sleeping shirt she was wearing, and it hung from her thin frame, shallowing up her figure, like a young boy sporting his father's coat. "Friends and brothers," the cap sang out, "our stern is to the coast, so there'll be no turning back now. The next time we drop anchor, we'll be doing it in the bay of this fair sea queen's kingdom." He waved his hand towards the girl, but she paid him no mind. She was still acting skittish and feral, just the same as she'd been since the first I laid eyes on her. "Our first mate, Anthony," continued the cap, "has been communicating with the female. It is he and only he who she has trusted with the coordinates to our kingdom, so follow his orders, sailors, and we'll all be wealthy men by the week's end." Anthony took a step forward to address the crew. He may not have been the captain, but he had the ship's reverence just the same, maybe more. "Ahoy, fellow sailors! When we set off on this vessel 4 days ago, we did so as fishermen and whalers, but when this voyage is over, we'll be returning home as men with influence, men of means." "Hear, hear," cheered the crew. "In a few days we'll be reaching our destination," he explained. "The entrance to this girl's kingdom lies within a place people call the Golden Grotto." And when he said that, I saw an eager smile stretch across the captain's face. It's a place plucked straight from the fables we read as children, a cavern where the water's liquid gold and the walls are encrusted with diamonds. When we find the Golden Grotto, we'll be so close to the treasure we'll be able to reach out and touch it. He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket. "I've been taking the liberty of drawing us a map based on me conversation with the girl. Now, if you be needing me, don't hesitate to call down to McQuarters. I'll be in there with the lass discussing the customs and diplomacy of her people. Such things will come in handy upon our first encounter with the royal party." Antony and the she-thing then departed from the group. Most of us went back to cracking jollies and laughing about our good fortune after that, but not Job. I spotted him hovering in the back of the crowd all by his lonesome. He just kept right on staring at the Scot and the girl until they disappeared below the ship's deck. Only now do I think I know what he was gaping at. He had spotted something wrong regarding those two, something I believe that I had spotted as well, but had been too afraid to admit. And now that these events are behind me, I can permit myself to recognize the signs that I had so willfully ignored. It wasn't Antony that had broken free from the group first once the meeting had adjourned. It was the girl. He had followed her all the way below deck and not the other way around, like a child tailing his mother on an afternoon stroll through the marketplace. Job saw it then, and I see it now. Thank you to Vincent V. Cava for writing this story exclusively for my channel. You can see more work from Vincent linked in the description below. I would like to make you all aware that Vincent and Mr. Creepypasta have joined together to create a new comic book anthology inspired by internet horror. The comic book is called simply Creepypasta and is a 48-page full-color book that will chill you to the bone. Please be sure to check out their Kickstarter campaign linked in the description below and donate if you feel so inclined. I've personally donated myself. Vincent and Mr. Creepypasta are both very good friends of mine, and I'd very much appreciate if you would support them. Thank you very much for listening, and please be sure to subscribe to my channel now, because you won't want to miss what's next. And if you'd like to hear the last story, you can either press on screen now, or you can press the link in the description below. And I will see you next Tuesday.